The drought did not arrive suddenly. It crept in, quiet, patient, cruel. First, the grass turned pale. Then the river shrank into a thin, tired ribbon of mud. After that, the cattle began to fall. And finally, the children stopped asking for food. Eliza Moore noticed that silence before anything else. Her cabin stood at the edge of Red Hollow, a forgotten frontier town where the wind carried dust instead of promises. The wooden walls were cracked, the roof patched with old canvas, but it was home. Or at least, it had been, before the land stopped giving back. Every morning, Eliza woke before the sun. Not because she had work waiting, but because hunger did not let her sleep. She would sit up slowly, careful not to wake the children, and listen. 3 breaths. 3 heartbeats. Tommy, the eldest, slept stiff and alert even in dreams, like a boy who had learned too early that safety was temporary. Clara curled beside him, thin arms wrapped around herself. And little Ben, only 5, still clutched the edge of Eliza's dress as if afraid she might disappear before dawn. Eliza brushed her fingers through Ben's hair, then pulled her hand back. Her own hair spilled loose over her shoulders, long and thick, the color of dark honey. Once, women in town had envied it. Once, her husband used to run his fingers through it and say, "It's like the land before it broke." That was before the fever took him. Before the drought finished what sickness started. Eliza rose quietly and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp and dry. The well bucket creaked as she pulled it up, too light. Again. She stared down into the darkness, jaw tight, then covered the well and turned away. Breakfast was thin porridge. Mostly water. She served the children first. "Eat slow," she said gently. "It lasts longer that way." Tommy nodded, pretending not to notice how little there was. Clara smiled, a forced, brave thing that hurt Eliza more than tears would have. Ben slurped happily, unaware that hunger was supposed to feel permanent. Eliza waited until they finished, then scraped the pot clean with her finger and licked it, ashamed and grateful all at once. Later that day, she walked into town. Red Hollow looked like a place already halfway buried. Storefronts were boarded up. The saloon stayed open, but only because men needed somewhere to forget. The butcher had nothing but bones. The baker shook his head before she even spoke. "I can pay later," Eliza said quietly. He didn't meet her eyes. "So can everyone." Outside, the wind lifted dust into her skirts. Eliza stood still, hands clenched, and felt something inside her settle into place. Not anger. Not fear. Decision. She walked past the church. Past the jail. Past the gallows she tried not to look at. And then she stopped. A small sign hung crooked in a window, "Hair bought. Fair price." Eliza stared at it for a long moment. She reached up and touched her braid. Felt its weight. Its warmth. It had been with her through girlhood, marriage, childbirth, grief. She had washed it in river water, brushed it by firelight, braided it with shaking hands after burying her husband. It was the last thing she owned that had no cracks. Inside, the room smelled of oil and dust. A woman sat behind the counter, older, sharp-eyed. "You sure?" the woman asked, glancing at Eliza's hair. Eliza nodded once. The scissors were cold. The sound they made was soft. Final. Each cut felt like a thread snapping inside her chest. Hair fell to the floor in heavy coils. Eliza kept her eyes on the wall, refusing to look down. When it was over, her head felt lighter. Wrong. The woman counted coins into her palm. Not many. But enough. Eliza wrapped her shawl tight and walked out. That night, there was bread. Real bread. The children stared as she set it down. "Is it a holiday?" Ben asked. Eliza smiled. "Something like that." They ate until crumbs covered the table. Clara laughed with her mouth full. Tommy closed his eyes as he chewed, like he wanted to remember the feeling. None of them noticed her hair. Not at first. When they slept, Eliza sat alone by the fire, rubbing her hands together, listening to the wind scrape against the walls. She reached up out of habit, and stopped. Her fingers met air. She swallowed. The drought did not end. Weeks passed. Then months. Eliza found other ways to stretch food. To trade. To endure. Her hair never grew past her jawline. Then her ears. Then barely at all. People stopped commenting. Sacrifices, she learned, were loud only once. After that, they became invisible. Years later, Red Hollow would whisper a new name with pride. Sheriff Moore. A man with a straight back, steady eyes, and a badge that caught the sun. But Eliza did not know that yet. All she knew, sitting in the quiet of her cabin, was that tomorrow she would wake before dawn again. And if the land demanded more from her, she would give it. Silently. Red Hollow felt the change before it saw it. People sensed it in the way the saloon doors stayed quiet at night, in how arguments ended before fists were raised. A new sheriff was coming, one with a reputation that traveled faster than the dust. Eliza Moore heard the name while kneading dough. Sheriff Moore, a woman said outside her door. Young. Clean. Came up hard. Eliza's hands froze. Moore. She did not step outside. She did not join the crowd gathering near the jail. Some things were safer seen from a distance. Later that afternoon, she walked to the well. The bucket scraped against dry stone as she lowered it, her shoulders tight, her breath shallow. Then she looked up. And saw him. He stood in the street like he belonged there, tall, straight-backed, the badge on his chest catching the sun. His coat was worn but cared for. His eyes moved constantly, measuring corners, watching hands, reading people. Eliza knew that walk. She had watched it stumble across dirt floors. She had seen it run barefoot through dust. She had chased it with a switch when it stole apples. Her son. Tommy. But the town called him Sheriff Moore now. Eliza's fingers dug into the wood of the well. For a moment, the world tilted. She forced herself to breathe. Forced herself to look away. He was speaking to men near the saloon, asking questions, listening more than he talked. He smiled once, quick, controlled. Not the smile of a boy. The smile of a man who had learned when not to trust it. She pulled the bucket up and turned, her shawl tight around her shoulders, her hair cropped short and thin from years of scarcity. She did not want him to see her like this. Not smaller. Not older. Not stripped of the things she had given away. Days passed. The sheriff worked hard. Gambling slowed. Fights ended early. People started locking their doors less. Eliza watched him from windows, from corners, from behind fences, always close enough to see, never close enough to touch the life she had let go. Sometimes she caught him looking at her. Not recognition. Just curiosity. One evening, rain finally came. It fell heavy and sudden, soaking the dirt, turning dust into mud. Eliza stepped outside and let it hit her face, her hands, her tired bones. She closed her eyes. "Ma'am." The voice came from behind her. She turned slowly. Sheriff Moore stood a few steps away, hat in hand, rain darkening his coat. Up close, she could see the scar near his jaw, the one he got at 16. The one she stitched with shaking hands. "I'm meeting folks around town," he said. "Making introductions." She nodded, unable to speak at first. "What's your name?" he asked. The question struck harder than any bullet ever could. "Eliza," she said finally. "Eliza Moore." He paused. "Moore, he repeated. Yes. His eyes searched her face, her lines, her tired eyes, the way her mouth held too much history. Then his gaze drifted upward. To her hair. Short. Uneven. Barely there. Forgive me, he said carefully, but, did you ever wear it long? Eliza felt something break loose inside her chest. Yes, she answered. A long time ago. He looked away, rain sliding down his jaw. When I was a boy, he said quietly, my mother had hair like sunlight. Long enough to braid twice. Eliza swallowed. Time changes people, she said. He nodded. Yes. It does. There was silence between them, thick, heavy, filled with words neither could afford to say. If you ever need anything, he said at last, the sheriff's door is open. Then he stepped back, replaced his hat, and walked away. Eliza stood in the rain long after he was gone. That night, she sat by the fire and ran a comb through her hair out of habit. The teeth caught nothing. Her hands trembled. She thought of the day she cut it. The bread on the table. The way her children ate without asking questions. She had given him everything. Her youth. Her strength. Her hair. And now he stood tall, wearing a badge, protecting a town that never knew what it had cost her. Eliza pressed her palm to her chest and whispered his name into the fire. Tommy. She knew the question would come one day. She could see it already, waiting in his eyes. Why didn't it grow back? And when that moment arrived, she would finally tell him the truth. The call came just after sunrise. Sheriff Moore stood in the doorway of the jail, reading the note twice before folding it carefully and slipping it into his coat. A minor dispute, they said. Nothing urgent. But something in his chest felt tight. Eliza Moore's cabin sat at the edge of Red Hollow, where the land still looked wounded from the drought. He had passed it many times without knowing why it pulled at him. Today, he followed that pull. She answered the door slowly. Up close, she looked smaller than he remembered, though he couldn't place where the memory came from. Her shoulders were narrow. Her hands rough. Her hair barely brushed her jaw, thin and uneven, like it had forgotten how to grow. Sheriff, she said. Ma'am. He removed his hat. I hope I'm not intruding. She stepped aside without a word. Inside, the cabin was clean but sparse. A table. 3 chairs. A shelf with old tin cups. On the wall hung a small braid of hair, tied with a faded ribbon. His eyes locked on it. That's, his voice trailed off. Eliza noticed. She had always known this moment would come. I kept it, she said quietly. He moved closer, studying it like evidence from a crime scene. The color was unmistakable. The weight. The memory of fingers brushing against his face when he was small. I don't understand, he said. Eliza sat down slowly. You were never meant to. He swallowed. Did I know you, before? Yes. The word fell between them like a gunshot. He looked at her fully now, really looked. The lines around her eyes. The familiar set of her mouth. The way she held herself, braced against loss. Mama? The word came out broken, uncertain. Eliza closed her eyes. Yes, Tommy. The room went very still. He sat across from her, hands clenched, breathing uneven. Why didn't you tell me? You left, she said. And you needed to. His voice shook. I looked for you. I hid, she replied. On purpose. Why? She stood, walked to the shelf, and took down the braid. Placed it gently in his hands. Because hunger doesn't wait, she said. And pride doesn't feed children. His fingers trembled as he held it. I sold my hair, she continued. The first time, for bread. The second, for medicine. The third, so you and your brother and sister could eat without seeing fear in my eyes. His throat tightened. It never grew back. She met his gaze. No, tears filled his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. I wore this badge, he whispered, to protect people like you. She smiled softly. Then it worked. Silence wrapped around them. Finally, he asked the question she had been waiting years to hear. Mama, why didn't it grow back? Eliza reached out and touched his cheek, just once. Because some sacrifices, she said, aren't meant to be seen. He broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the quiet collapse of a man realizing the cost of his survival. He pressed his forehead into her palm like he had when he was a child. I'm sorry, he said. For leaving. She shook her head. You lived. That was enough. Outside, the town went on. Boots on wood. Wind in dry grass. A sheriff's badge catching the sun. Inside the cabin, a mother and her son sat together, holding what remained of love given freely, and never returned. And for the first time since the drought began, Eliza Moore felt full. Not with food. But with truth. Red Hollow did not change overnight. Towns like that never do. Change came slowly, the way droughts ended, not in celebration, but in quiet signs only those who had suffered knew how to read. A repaired fence. A child laughing without looking over their shoulder. A mother walking through town without shame. Sheriff Moore became part of that quiet change. After the truth surfaced, he did not announce it. He did not correct anyone who spoke of him as a self-made man. He carried the knowledge the way his mother always had, without display, without demand for recognition. But something inside him shifted. Before, he enforced the law like armor. Now, he wore it like responsibility. Every decision passed through a new question he had never asked before: who will this hurt when the sun goes down? Eliza Moore felt the weight lift differently. For years, her life had been survival measured in hours and days. After Tommy returned to her life, not as a boy, not as a stranger, but as a man who finally knew, the future stretched further than she was used to seeing. She still woke before dawn. Still rationed without thinking. Still caught herself saying, I'm not hungry, even when she was. But she laughed more now. Sometimes it surprised her. One morning, she stood in front of the small cracked mirror in her cabin and studied her reflection. Her hair lay thin against her scalp, uneven and stubborn. It had never returned the way it once was. No matter how carefully she washed it. No matter how patiently she waited. She touched it gently. I didn't lose you, she whispered to herself. I spent you. And that made all the difference. The town council approached the sheriff late that spring. They wanted to honor Eliza. A small ceremony. A plaque. Something to recognize what she had done. Tommy listened without interrupting. When they finished, he shook his head. She wouldn't want it, he said. She deserves it, one man argued. Tommy met his gaze. She deserves peace. That was the end of the discussion. Instead, he did something else. He expanded the town's food fund. Made sure no child went to sleep hungry in Red Hollow again. He redirected fines into supplies. Forced merchants to keep prices fair during hard seasons. No speeches. No dedications. Just action. Eliza never knew exactly how it happened. She only noticed that neighbors knocked more often, not to ask, but to bring soup. fresh bread. Firewood cut and stacked neatly by her door. She accepted quietly. Pride had no place left in her life. Summer came heavy and warm. Eliza's health began to falter, not suddenly, but steadily. Her hands trembled when she held a cup. Her steps shortened. The days tired her faster than before. Tommy noticed everything. "You need help," he said gently one evening. She waved him off. "I've had help my whole life. I just didn't call it that." But she agreed to move. Closer to town. Closer to him. The new house was small but solid. A proper stove. Windows that shut tight. A bed that didn't creak like it might give up at any moment. The first night there, Eliza slept straight through until morning. She hadn't done that in decades. Tommy stood outside her door longer than necessary, listening to her breathe. With autumn came memories. Eliza spoke of things she had kept buried for years. The first winter after her husband died. The night she traded her wedding ring for flour. The day she cut her hair for the first time. "I cried after," she admitted. "Not because it was gone. But because I knew I'd do it again." Tommy sat quietly, absorbing every word his mother spoke. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced along the rough wooden walls, giving life to shapes that belonged only to memory. The warmth of the hearth did little to chase the cold that had settled outside, a winter that seemed determined to test even the strongest hearts. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly, almost afraid that the words might shatter the fragile peace between them. Eliza Moore's lips curved in a gentle smile, the kind that carried decades of endurance and quiet sorrow. "Because children carry enough weight already," she said, her voice tender, carrying both love and a secret burden that she had carried alone for so long. Tommy looked down at his hands, hands that had carried more than any boy should ever have to. Guns, cuffs, wounded men. The weight of life and death. He had fought to protect others, to uphold justice, yet he had never understood the origin of the strength that had guided him all these years. "I carried it anyway," he admitted, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and regret. "I just didn't know where it came from." Eliza reached out, placing her hand gently over his, feeling the roughness of his palms, the calluses earned from hard work and hardship. "Now you do," she whispered. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of years, sacrifices, and silent prayers. Winter returned to Red Hollow, colder and more relentless than anyone had anticipated. Snow fell thick and early, blanketing the town in pristine white silence. The streets, once alive with chatter and dust, moved slower, quieter. The town seemed to hold its breath, as if in mourning for the struggles that had shaped it and the people who had endured. Eliza's strength faded with the season. Some mornings, she remained in bed for hours, staring at the frost patterns that etched themselves across the window panes like messages written in ice. Tommy brought her meals, though she ate little, her appetite diminished by both age and the weight of memories. "You're hovering," she said one day, her voice soft but carrying the faintest hint of amusement. "I'm learning," he replied, trying to keep the tone light, though the worry in his eyes betrayed him. She smiled faintly, a small but significant victory, a reminder that life could still hold fleeting moments of joy even in the face of inevitable sorrow. One night, while the fire burned low and the wind whispered against the cabin walls, she asked him a question he had never anticipated. "Do you ever wish I'd kept it?" she asked. "Kept what?" he replied, uncertainty coloring his voice. "My hair. My youth. My strength," she said, her words carrying decades of sacrifice and quiet endurance. He didn't answer immediately. He thought of all the nights he had been guided by instincts he could not name, by strength he had never questioned. He thought of every life he had saved, every act of justice he had carried out, and finally spoke. "No," he said at last. "Because then I wouldn't be who I am." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek unnoticed. "Good," she whispered. "Then it wasn't wasted." The end came quietly. No dramatic final words. No long goodbye. Just a morning where Eliza did not wake. Tommy found her with her hands folded neatly, her face calm in a way he had never seen before. For the first time since childhood, she looked truly rested. The hardships, the sacrifices, the silent prayers, all of it seemed to have dissolved into the stillness of her final breath. He sat beside her for a long time. Did not cry. Did not move. Outside, snow fell without sound, layering the town in quiet reflection. The world seemed to pause, honoring the woman whose life had shaped so many unseen threads of existence in Red Hollow. The townspeople gathered in silence. No one needed to be told who she was. They had felt her influence for years, in the meals shared, in the children who survived, in the sheriff who chose mercy when he could have chosen force. Tommy stood alone at her grave, the cold earth under his boots, snow clinging to the edges of his coat. He removed his badge, holding it against his chest, not as a symbol of authority, but as a promise. "I will remember," he said quietly. "Even when no one else does." He replaced the badge where it belonged and covered her grave with soil, the snow melting softly around it. The wind carried whispers of her life, her laughter, and her silent resilience through the trees. Spring returned, as it always does. The tree Eliza had planted years earlier, over the buried braid of her hair, bloomed fully for the first time. Its branches stretched wide, its leaves thick and alive, and for the first time, it seemed to carry not just life, but memory. Children played beneath it. Mothers rested in its shade, their laughter gentle, unaware of the story that had given birth to the peace they now felt. No one knew why that spot felt safe, why the air seemed lighter, why the grass grew greener around that single tree. Tommy visited often. Sometimes he stood there in uniform, a reminder of the life he had built. Sometimes without it, a man at peace, carrying lessons that no badge could ever symbolize. Once, a young boy approached him, curiosity brimming in his eyes. "Sheriff, who planted this tree?" he asked. Tommy looked up at the branches, swaying gently in the wind, sunlight breaking through like scattered gold. "A woman who fed her children," he said softly. The boy frowned. "That's it?" Tommy smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "That's everything," he said. Years passed. Red Hollow grew. Slowly. Carefully. Tommy grew older too. Lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. Gray threaded his hair. He never left the town, never sought higher position, never chased a bigger name. This was where he was needed. This was where the lessons mattered most. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit outside the old cabin at the edge of town, the one now empty, and listen to the wind. He imagined her voice in it. Not loud. Not commanding. Just steady. Just right. And when hard choices came, as they always did, he asked himself one final question before acting: what would a woman who cut her hair to feed her children do? The answer never led him wrong. Some sacrifices are loud. Some are remembered. And some never grow back, but grow into everything else. And in that truth, Red Hollow, Tommy, and every child who grew up in its shadow carried her legacy, quiet yet unshakable, like the roots of a tree that refused to die. The wind through the branches whispered it endlessly, that love given selflessly, courage shown silently, and sacrifices made in shadow are the ones that shape the world in ways no one can measure. Eliza Moore's story was now woven into the fabric of the town itself. Every snow-covered street, every blooming tree, every quiet hearth, held a fragment of her heart. And for Tommy, every day was a reminder that life, with all its trials, could still hold meaning, and that some acts of love, though unseen by most, never truly fade.